The young woman dropped to her knees in front of the weathered grave, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers so tightly that several stems snapped in her trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face as if years of pain had finally found a way out. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant rustling of trees beneath the bright afternoon sun. Yet her sobs carried through the stillness, raw and heartbreaking. She looked at the name carved into the stone and whispered words only the dead could hear. What she didn't know was that someone was watching from a distance. A wealthy man in an expensive suit stood frozen several rows away, staring at her in disbelief. The grave she was crying over belonged to his wife. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change lives and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, comment below, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Lifeline Corner. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this one to life. The millionaire's name was Alaric Voss. At 52 years old, he was one of the most successful businessmen in the city. Newspapers often featured his achievements, his luxury properties, and his growing empire. People saw a powerful man who seemed to have everything. What they never saw was the loneliness hidden behind his success. 7 years earlier, Alaric had lost his wife, Serafina, to a sudden illness. She had been his heart, his closest friend, and the one person who cared more about people than money. Her death shattered him. Since then, he had visited her grave every month without fail. It was the only place where he allowed himself to grieve. That afternoon, he had arrived carrying fresh lilies, Serafina's favorite flowers. But instead of finding the peaceful solitude he expected, he found a young woman weeping uncontrollably beside the grave. The woman looked no older than 24. Her clothes were clean but worn. Her shoes showed signs of years of use. She looked exhausted, as if life had demanded more from her than she could possibly give. Curiosity and concern finally pushed Alaric forward. When she noticed him approaching, she quickly wiped her eyes and stood up. Embarrassed, Alaric glanced at the flowers she had placed beside the headstone. Then he looked at her. He quietly told her that this was his wife's grave and asked what her story was. The question seemed to break something open inside her. Her name was Mirelle Hart. For a moment she struggled to speak. Then words poured out between tears. 20 years earlier, Mirelle's mother had been a homeless teenager living on the streets. She had been hungry, frightened, and pregnant. Most people walked past her as if she didn't exist. Some insulted her. Others ignored her suffering. Then one rainy evening, a stranger stopped. That stranger was Serafina. At the time, Serafina was only in her 20s. She wasn't wealthy yet. She simply had a kind heart. She bought Mirelle's mother food, paid for a motel room, helped her find medical care, and continued checking on her for months. When Mirelle was born, Serafina brought baby clothes, diapers, and supplies. More importantly, she gave hope. According to Mirelle's mother, that kindness saved both their lives. Years later, as Mirelle grew older, her mother often told her stories about the woman who had appeared like an angel during their darkest days. Whenever life became difficult, her mother would point to a faded photograph of Serafina and remind her that good people still existed. Then tragedy struck. Mirelle's mother became seriously ill when Mirelle was 17. Medical bills piled up. They lost their apartment and struggled to survive. Despite working multiple jobs, Mirelle couldn't stop the downward spiral. Before her mother passed away, she made one final request. She asked Mirelle to find Serafina someday and thank her. For years Mirelle searched, but every lead ended in disappointment. Eventually she discovered the heartbreaking truth: Serafina had died years earlier. When Mirelle learned where she was buried, she began saving money from her small cleaning job to visit the cemetery. That day marked the anniversary of her mother's death. She had come to fulfill a promise. As she finished telling her story, silence settled between them. Alaric felt his chest tighten. For 7 years he had mourned his wife while believing her impact on the world ended with her death. Now he was standing in front of living proof that her kindness had echoed through decades. He looked at the young woman and saw genuine gratitude, not for money, not for opportunity, for compassion, the very thing Serafina valued most. For the first time in years, Alaric smiled through tears. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed again. what began as a conversation at a grave slowly grew into an unlikely friendship. Alaric learned more about Mirelle's life. She worked long hours cleaning office buildings during the day and studying accounting at night. Despite her intelligence and determination, poverty followed her everywhere. Her tiny apartment suffered from leaking pipes and broken heating. She often skipped meals to pay tuition fees. Yet she never complained. Instead, she volunteered at shelters whenever she could. When Alaric asked why she spent her little free time helping others, her answer reminded him painfully of Serafina. She explained that someone once saved her family when they had nothing. She believed the greatest way to honor that gift was by helping others whenever possible. The words lingered in Alaric's mind. One afternoon he visited one of the shelters where Mirelle volunteered. What he witnessed stunned him. She wasn't seeking recognition, she wasn't posting photos online, she wasn't trying to impress anyone, she simply cared. She listened to lonely elderly residents, she helped children with homework. She comforted struggling mothers. Everywhere she went, people smiled. For the first time since losing Serafina, Alaric felt as though he was seeing a piece of her spirit alive in the world again. Months passed, then a devastating setback struck Mirelle. The accounting program she attended announced a sudden tuition increase. Without additional funds, she would be forced to drop out before graduation. The news crushed her. She had worked for years toward that goal. Graduating represented her chance to escape poverty, yet she refused to ask anyone for help. When Alaric learned what happened, he faced a difficult decision. Part of him wanted to simply pay everything immediately, but he knew Mirelle's pride and independence mattered. Instead, he created a scholarship foundation in Serafina's name. The foundation's purpose was to support hardworking students facing financial hardship. Mirelle became its first recipient. When she received the acceptance letter, she cried harder than she had at the cemetery, not because someone had rescued her, but because the woman who had once saved her mother was still changing lives, even after death. The following year brought remarkable changes. Mirelle graduated with honors. She secured a position at a respected financial firm. Her income finally allowed her to live comfortably, yet success never changed her character. She continued volunteering, she continued helping others, she continued carrying kindness wherever she went. Meanwhile, Alaric underwent a transformation of his own. 4 years' grief had imprisoned him. Meeting Mirelle helped him understand something important. The people we lose never truly disappear when their goodness continues through others. Serafina's legacy wasn't buried beneath a stone. It lived inside every life she touched, and those lives touched others in return. One sunny afternoon, nearly 2 years after their first meeting, Alaric and Mirelle stood together at the cemetery once again. Fresh flowers rested beside the grave, the sky was bright blue, birds sang in the nearby trees. For the first time, neither of them was crying. Instead, they were smiling. Around them stood dozens of scholarship recipients whose educations had been funded through Serafina's foundation. Some had become teachers, others nurses, some engineers. Many came from backgrounds filled with hardship. Each represented another chapter in a story of compassion that refused to end. Mirelle looked at the grave and silently thanked the woman she had never truly met, the woman who had altered the course of multiple generations through a single act of kindness. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to Lifeline Corner. Stories like these remind us that even the smallest act of kindness can create ripples that last for decades. Special request: comment below with the words, "Kindness lives forever," if you believe one good deed can change someone's entire future. As the afternoon sunlight bathed the cemetery in golden warmth, Alaric realized something profound. Wealth could build buildings. Success could create influence. But kindness had the power to outlive both. One compassionate decision made by a young woman on a rainy evening had saved a mother, inspired a daughter, created opportunities for countless students, and healed a grieving husband years later. And perhaps that is the most beautiful truth of all, that we never truly know how far our kindness will travel. Sometimes a single moment of compassion becomes a story that lives on long after we're gone. And somewhere beyond what the eye can see, perhaps Serafina was smiling, knowing that the love she gave to the world had found its way home.